Okay, good evening. It is time for us to finish this book. Um, we would have finished it last week, but I got invited to go on a hike that turned out to be an extremely long hike. I left my car, or we left our cars at 7, didn't get back till midnight. So, I didn't make the reading. So, anyway, we'll finish up the last two chapters in the epilogue in this book tonight, and then we'll get on next time to whatever's next. I have to actually look at um, the timeline and see where we're at. Um, yeah, I have everything in order. I just need to open up the next one. Anyway, chapter 32. Darth Carrad had to admire the Republic fleet commander. Realizing they couldn't exchange blows with the Ascendant spear, they'd switched tactics, scattering to harry her from a distance while employing a series of hit-and-run attacks and feints to frustrate her and extend the battle. The defensive strategy gave them no hope of inflicting any actual damage against the spear, but it prevented Carrad from wiping them out in a single glorious attack. Instead, she was forced to hunt down each ship one by one. She began with one of the capital ships, turning the spear on an intercept course as her target used a series of random and unexpected changes of direction to try to evade her. The other vessels in the Republic fleet tried to distract her from her goal, firing at her flanks while keeping at what seemed a safe distance. But with the spear there was no safe distance. Even as she closed on the first capital ship, choosing one of the three at random, she was able to target one of the corvettes swooping in on her starboard side. The spear's guns roared as the corvette tried to veer off at the last second, but the ion cannons were able to penetrate the shields, ravaging the hull and knocking out all power other than emergency life support. Instead of changing course to finish off the now helpless corvette, Carrad continued to bear down on the capital ship, relentlessly pursuing it as she hammered away with her turbolasers, rapidly draining what remained of their shields in preparation for the coup de grace. The other two capital ships converged on her, guns blazing. Even the spear's deflectors couldn't hold up for long against their coordinated assault, and Carrad was forced to break off from her original prey, but not before unleashing a final volley that crippled the engines. She changed course and accelerated, circling up and away from the other two capital ships before coming around to face them. The vessels wisely broke off in opposite directions, so she chose one at random and resumed her pursuit, knowing this one wouldn't be saved by an untimely intervention of the others, not with one of them forced to limp along at a fraction of its top speed. Before she could engage the second capital ship, however, she felt a sudden drop in power, and the spear slowed noticeably. It took her a moment to recognize what had happened, and then she realized she could no longer sense Quux, Ordez, and her apprentice. Something had broken them out of their meditative trance, forcing Carrad to rely only on her own power to control the vessel. Briefly turning her focus from the battlefield to her immediate surroundings, she sensed a battle raging in the command chamber outside her impervious crystal sphere. Nosteral had escaped and come for her. Carrad returned her attention to the battle, confident her new followers would be more than a match for the Jedi, and though it was more difficult trying to control the spear alone, she had done it before. At the same time, she sensed another attempt from the saboteur, this one coming from the control console outside her command pod. She batted away the clumsy attempt, knowing he would try again, one more distraction to further slow her down. Though it would now take longer to finish off the Republic fleet, Carrad knew that victory was still inevitable. Jace had tasted defeat before, but we switched over to the fleet. Jace had tasted defeat before, but never as bitter as this. Though the battle would drag on, he already knew it was over. Republic casualties were mounting. He'd lost several support vessels, and one of his capital ships was barely mobile. Now Carrad was coming after the Aegis. The spear was closing in on them, though more slowly than before. He didn't know if Carrot was being cautious or if she was merely toying with them, but it didn't matter. Her ship was still too fast and maneuverable for them to outrun, and with only one capital ship still able to come to his aid, there wouldn't be enough of a threat to force her to break off her attack. Enemy coming in range, the helmsman noted. Jace realized he meant they were now in the spear's range. They were still too far away for the Aegis to fight back. Divert all available power to the deflectors, he said, knowing it would only buy them a few more minutes. Shut down everything except life support and sensors, even the weapons systems. The bridge suddenly went dark, lit only by the glow of the screens. Going to end bad? Tefeth asked from somewhere in the blackness. Very bad, Jace answered. Nostaral rushed his three opponents, hoping to put a quick end to the battle. His blade flickered and danced as his body went into a series of spins and leaps. Carrod's apprentice, the one he'd fought before, retreated, but the two newcomers met his assault head-on, driving him back with their aggressive counterattacks. Realizing he wasn't just facing raw apprentices this time, the Jedi switched back to a more defensive strategy as his enemies pressed forward. The Sith's twin purple blades came at him from all angles, a high slash from the right, a low cut from the left, a pair of diagonal chops. The human's massive double-bladed lightsaber was more direct, crashing down in a repetitive series of overhand strikes as he tried to bludgeon his way through Nostaral's guard. The Jedi Master met and repelled each and every attack, holding his ground behind a near impenetrable wall of defense. Even with the apprentice joining the fray, he didn't waver. The Soresu style, when performed perfectly, could keep numerous attackers with a variety of styles at bay indefinitely, or at least until exhaustion and fatigue forced Nostaral to make a mistake. That was the great drawback of Soresu. It demanded a passive role. It could delay defeat, but it couldn't bring victory, and at 3 against 1, his enemies would not need long to wear him down. Fortunately, despite the impressive individual skill possessed by 2 of his 3 opponents, his foes were not attacking him as a group. They lacked unity of purpose. They didn't time or coordinate their attacks, occasionally even getting in one another's way. Nostaral was able to exploit this single flaw to his advantage, drawing both of his more skilled opponents in at the same time by dipping his right shoulder and letting his blade slip a fraction too far forward as he parried one of his third foe's clumsy thrusts. Both seized the chance to come at him hard, looking to exploit the perceived vulnerability, allowing Nostaral to spin quickly away in the opposite direction. Suddenly bereft of their shared target, the 2 Sith were forced to pull back and abort their attacks to keep from getting tangled up with each other, momentarily leaving the apprentice at Nostaral's mercy. He wasted no time in disposing of his lesser opponent. The apprentice blocked 2 overhand strikes, but then overreached when then Keldor feinted a third, leaving himself vulnerable down low. The Jedi turned his wrist and spun to his left, reversing the direction of his blade too quickly for the apprentice to recover, and removed him from the battle with a deep slash across the midsection that nearly severed the young man in 2. The entire sequence had taken less than a second, but even so, Nostaral barely turned back in time to ward off the next wave of attacks from the 2 more dangerous warriors. Once again he fell into the precise, efficient moves of Soresu to battle them to a standstill, but he could already feel fatigue creeping in, the intensity of the combat wearing him down despite the sustaining power of the Force. Theron worked furiously at the command console along the edge of the room, knowing his slicer spike wouldn't last much longer before burning out. He'd overclocked it to 150% capacity as he burrowed into the digital labyrinth, looking for a way to get inside Carrod's invulnerable crystal sphere. This was different from slicing the relays in the engine room. The console was linked directly to Carrod's command pod. An emergency override her apprentices could use to get her out if something ever went wrong, say if the vessel suffered major damage while she was at the controls, leaving her comatose and trapped inside the crystal sphere. But every time Therad tried to activate the emergency override, Carrad thwarted his efforts. She wasn't 3 steps ahead of him this time. Without the support of her meditating followers, she had slowed down to Theron's level. But she had home field advantage. She knew the inner workings of her ship better than he ever would. Theron kept trying, waging digital war with her, painfully aware that time was running out. Nostral couldn't hold off her lightsaber-wielding bodyguards much longer. The security personnel in the hall were using a plasma torch to carve through the disabled door, and outside the spear was picking off the Republic ships one by one. He cursed as Carrad booted him from the system, forcing him to start all over. Shields down to 10%, the helmsman said, as another volley slammed into the Aegis, causing it to buck and heave. Jace knew they'd already taken heavy damage. The only reason the alarms weren't blaring through the ship was because he'd diverted power from the emergency response systems to the deflectors. With their shields down to critical levels, one more hit was all it would take to finish them off. "I'm sorry, Jace," Satele said, emerging from the darkness to place a hand on his shoulder. He reached up and covered her hand with his thick, calloused fingers. "At least we fought the good fight," he replied, squeezing Satele's hand as they braced for the end. Theron realized what he was doing wrong. He was trying to gain control of the pod's emergency override, basically trying to pull control of a vital system out of Carrad's grasp, but he didn't need to control the emergency override to trigger it. Instead of trying to take control of the system, he flooded it with a rush of false data. Critical damage reports from all sectors of the vessel poured in, the catastrophic failure of the entire ship setting off the emergency evacuation alarms. At the same time, he heard a loud hiss as the airtight crystal sphere popped open. Darth Carrad was seated in a chair in the middle, surrounded by a writhing mass of loose, dangling wires that only seconds before had linked her to the ship. The Faline's eyes went wide and she screamed as the connection was broken, a keening wail of loss and suffering. Seeing Theron, she rose from her seat, pulled her lightsaber, and slowly advanced on him with murder in her eyes. "Status report," Moff Lorman shouted as the evacuation alarms rang out on the bridge of the Ascendant Spear. "Has to be a system malfunction, sir," one of the crew said. "According to this, we're all dead." "Darth Carrad has relinquished control of the vessel," someone else informed him. The Moff hesitated, knowing his next decision could forever alter the course of his career, and possibly cost him his life. Darth Carrad had never turned control of the spear over to him during battle, not once. If she was incapacitated, then he clearly needed to step in, but it was hard to imagine how something like that could have happened. What if she hadn't relinquished control? What if this was just another malfunction, or some kind of ploy to trick the Republic? If he tried to take control of the ship against her wishes, she'd have him skinned alive. "Sir, do you want to take command?" "No," he said, "not yet. Not until we know what's going on." In the darkness that enveloped the bridge of the Aegis, every second spent waiting for the spear's final attack felt like an eternity. Satele had turned her hand on Jace's shoulder so she could grip him more tightly. Jace felt her squeezing as hard as she could. He didn't mind. At least in their final moments they had each other. Several more eternities ticked by. Then Tethys said, "Not dead yet." No, Jace thought, but we should be, unless... "This is our chance. Transfer all power to the forward guns. All ships, fire at will, fire at will." Okay, excuse me a minute. I do not abide these advertisements on my channel. So that's an instant ban. Okay, back to where we were. Which was where? Not dead yet. Okay, fire at will. As the Ascendant Spear heaved and shook under the relentless Republic assault, Moff Lorman realized the alarms ringing out were no longer due to a malfunction in the system. His reluctance to take command of the spear had left it vulnerable, and the Republic fleet had seized the moment. All around him, people were shouting, relaying damage reports from all decks. He had no idea if Darth Carid was still alive, but he wasn't going to hesitate a second time. "Abandon ship," he shouted, thumbing the button to transmit his orders to the entire crew. "By order of Moff Lorman, abandon ship." Then he jumped from his chair and joined the rush of men and women racing from the bridge towards the nearest escape pods. Well, I was quick, but it was a heavy barrage. Anyway, that is the end of that chapter. So we'll jump right on into chapter 33. In all her years learning the ways of the dark side, Carid had never felt a rage like this. The alarms pealing through the ship only added to her fury. To her, they were like the cries of her own child. The worm crawling away from her in his underwear had caused this. The maggot had violated her ship, his intrusion corrupting the spear. He had befouled Darth Mekis's perfect creation. He had torn her away from her second self, severing the bond that made her whole. For that, she wasn't going to just kill him. She wasn't even going to capture him and strap him to the interrogation machine. She was going to hack him apart piece by piece, listening to him scream and beg for mercy as she hewed off his limbs one by one before gutting him and leaving him writhing in agony on the floor. Theron didn't bother calling out to Nostral for help as Carid slowly advanced on him. The Jedi already had his hands full. He didn't try to reason with his assailant either. He could see the madness in her eyes. She threw her lightsaber and Theron rolled out of the way, grabbing his damaged blaster from where it rested on the floor beside him as he did so. The blade cleaved the control panel he'd used to slice into the spear and force her from her pod. And he realized she hadn't been aiming at him. She was just destroying the thing he'd used against her. The lightsaber flew back to her hand, and she turned to Theron, who was still lying on the floor. He raised his blaster and pointed it at her, a hollow gesture considering he couldn't fire it again without causing the overloaded power pack to explode. She took another step forward, raising her blade to hurl it again, and this time Theron knew he was going to be the target. Just as the blade was released from her hand, the entire ship was rocked, knocking Carid off balance and disrupting her aim by a few precious centimeters. The deadly blade carved a furrow in the floor just beside Theron's right hand. The room shook again, and Theron heard the distant sound of an explosion, audible even over the clanging alarms. It was followed quickly by several more detonations, and the entire vessel began to shake and shudder as the Republic fleet rained fire down upon them. Carid screamed and wheeled away from Theron, racing back to her command pod so she could retake control and save her precious ship. She threw herself into the seat, the dangling wires coming to life, their tips burrowing into the implants in her flesh. Theron squeezed the trigger on his defective blaster. No bolts came out, but the power pack shrieked and squealed in protest. He hurled the blaster in Carid's direction. It landed short and skittered across the floor, sliding up against the base of her command chair, as the two halves of the sphere snapped shut. Even through the impervious crystal, the explosion was loud enough to make his ears ring. It was impossible to see through the opaque crystal to witness the gruesome carnage inside, but Theron didn't necessarily think that was a bad thing. As much as he wanted to defeat Darth Carid, he had no desire to see her splattered all over the command pod's walls. But though their master was dead, her apprentices fought on. Master Nostral saw Darth Carid leave her pod and head toward Theron, but he wasn't able to break away from his duel with the two Sith Lords. As fatigue had whittled away the Jedi's speed and concentration, he had stopped being able to stand his ground. The relentless pressure of his opponents had slowly driven him backward until they had him against the wall. Despite what was happening all around them, their battle had raged on unabated. With single-minded focus, his enemies ignored the alarms as they began to ring out. The explosions that rocked the ship and made the entire room shake had given them no pause. But the blast from inside Carrad's command pod was so near and so loud it actually snapped the attention of all three combatants away from their duel. Over the loudspeaker, a voice rose above the alarms, giving the order to abandon ship. Nosteral knew the Imperial soldiers outside, trying to cut through the door, would heed the call, but he wasn't so sure about the two Sith in the room. "You can stay and finish me off as this ship crumbles around us," the Keldor said, gasping for breath, "or we can call this a draw and make a break for the escape pods." The pureblood raised his purple blades as if ready to continue the fight, but he quickly changed his mind when his partner turned and raced toward the exit. A powerful blast of the Force sent the jammed door panel hurtling out into the now empty hall beyond. A second later they were gone, disappearing down the hall. Another explosion caused the spear to start listing over to its side. The artificial gravity systems should have reacted and automatically recalibrated themselves, but the damage inflicted by the Republic fleet must have been too great, and suddenly Nosteral found himself slipping down the tilted floor. He slid out the door and into the corridor, joined a second later by Theron. The Jedi Master used the Force to keep himself from slamming into the wall. The SIS agent wasn't so lucky. "I think we've overstayed our welcome," Theron said. "Lead the way," the Jedi offered. The ship slowly continued to tip, and soon the side wall served as their floor. They reached the turbo lift without seeing any sign of the two Sith Lords, or any of the soldiers they had run into earlier. "Looks like we're the last ones at the party," Theron said, and the lift doors opened and they awkwardly crawled inside. "Better remember to turn out the lights." "I think the Republic is doing that for us," the Jedi answered, as another series of explosions capsized the spear completely, and the turbolift shuddered to a halt. From on board the bridge of the Aegis... Let's see, did I accidentally skip? Nope, okay. Just making sure I didn't skip a page here. From on board the bridge of the Aegis, Jace watched the mass exodus of nearly 1,000 escape pods as the Imperials fled the Ascendant Spear. By his order, the fleet was still firing on Carrad's ship. He thought about calling off the assault. He had no idea if his son and Master Nosteral were still aboard, but the risk of a final retaliation, even as the vessel lay dying, was too great. As Supreme Commander of the Republic forces, he couldn't jeopardize the lives of everyone aboard the ships under his command for the sake of a single person, not even his own son. He tried to reassure himself by arguing that he didn't actually have any proof Theron had been on the ship during the battle, but given everything that had taken place, it was likely. Hopefully he had some way of getting off alive, though from what he knew of his son, not having a pre-planned evacuation strategy wouldn't have stopped him. The escape pods continued to deploy, shooting off in 100 different directions. It would be impossible to track them all down, though it wouldn't be hard to turn the guns of the fleet against them and wipe virtually all of them out. "Just let them all go?" Tefeth asked. "What do you care?" Jace snapped. "Don't," the Twi'lek said with a shrug. "Just surprised. Thought you hated imps." Lacking hyperdrives, the range of the pods was limited. Most would end up landing on Duros orbital cities where authorities would take them into custody. Some would head in the opposite direction, trying to make it to the system's less populated worlds. There they would hole up, relying on the transponders to lead an Imperial recovery team to their location for rescue, but the number who would actually make it back to the Empire was minimal. Besides, Jace thought, Theron might be on one of them. He glanced over at Satele and saw that her eyes were staring off into the distance at nothing in particular. He recognized the look. She was reaching out with the Force to try to find Theron and Nosteral. "Are they out there?" "I don't know," she said at last, bowing her head in defeat. "The dark side energies of the spear make it difficult to see. Perhaps if we had a special bond..." She trailed off. "Don't worry," Tefeth said. "Theron's tough. Just better remember to pay us when it's over." Oh, that was Tethys. I don't know. I didn't even register that was Tethys. Despite her seemingly cavalier attitude, even Jace could tell she was as troubled as the rest of them. Theron had left his slicer spike behind in the control console of Carad's inner sanctum. At the time, retrieving it had taken a back seat to avoiding getting chopped in half by her flying lightsaber. Without it, however, he was unable to slice into the turbo lift to try to restart it. Forced to rely on cruder methods, he kicked the wall twice, and a deep groan came up from the shaft below, or maybe now it was above. Slowly, the lift started moving again. "I'm surprised that worked," the Jedi remarked. "Me and this ship have a bit of a history now," Theron said with a wink. When they reached D-Deck, the lift doors opened several centimeters, then stopped. Theron kicked the wall again, but nothing happened. "Can you, Theron asked his companion, twiddling his fingers in the air. "Using the Force is more taxing than you think," the Jedi told him. "Grab on." Nosteral took hold of the edge of one of the doors, Theron the other. Grunting and straining, they managed to make enough room to squeeze through. The corridor beyond was dark. Even the emergency lighting had failed. As they climbed out onto the floor, what had been the ceiling before the spear capsized, the Jedi ignited his green blade to light their way. The ship shuddered again, and they heard a deep boom, distinctly different from the sound of the explosions caused by the Republic bombardment. "Engine room," Theron said. "Cooling systems must have shut down." He knew Nosteral didn't need him to explain what would happen when the hypermatter containment unit overheated. The resulting explosion would vaporize the entire ship. Scrambling down the hall, they reached the escape pod bays. "Empty," Theron muttered as they passed the first bay. "Empty, empty, empty. Ah, there it is." "Carad's private escape pod," Theron said with a smile. "Figured nobody would be dumb enough to grab it." They piled in as the ship began to shake even more violently than before. Theron slammed the button to seal the pod doors, and Nosteral punched the controls to jettison them into space. Theron looked back at the dying spear through the rear viewport as they floated away. The ship erupted in a fireworks display of explosions, each one seemingly brighter and larger than the last, and then the vessel was consumed in a brilliant white flash, punctuated by the rapidly expanding ring of glowing energy that characterized a massive hypermatter explosion. An oppressive silence hovered over the bridge of the Aegis. The sound of fingers tapping at control consoles and the soft electronic beeps from the workstations only emphasized the complete lack of conversation. "It's been too long," Jace thought. "Nobody on board could have survived that last explosion." He glanced over at Satele, but she didn't return his gaze. She was standing with her eyes closed and her hands clasped in front of her chest. Jace had no way of knowing if she was still trying to use the Force to find Theron, or if she was just trying to hold herself together. "Signal coming in from one of the escape pods, sir." The crewman's voice shattered the silence. Startled, Jace let out a breath he didn't even know he was holding. "Patch it through," the Supreme Commander ordered, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. "Hey, Aegis," Theron's voice came over the speaker. "Any chance me and my Jedi friend here can hitch a ride?" 5 minutes later, Jace, Satele, and Tethys were down in the docking bay, along with almost another 20 members of the Aegis crew, as the escape pod door popped open. Master Nosteral came out first, followed by Theron. Everyone assembled broke into a round of spontaneous applause and cheers. Jace joined in, slapping his big hands heartily together as an unexpected wave of pride and joy he hadn't felt in years rushed through him. It was all he could do to keep from charging forward and embracing both of the heroes in a fierce bear hug. "Welcome back," he said, snapping off a sharp salute instead. "Looks like everyone showed up to say hi," Theron said, his eyes shifting from the crowd to Jace, to Tethys, and finally to Satele. "And I do mean everyone." "The Republic owes you a debt it can never repay," Satele said, and Jace could tell she was also struggling to stay reserved in front of the rest of the assembled troops. It was the irrepressible Twi'lek who finally said what they were all thinking, but didn't have the courage to bring up. You know you both naked, right? And that is the end of that chapter. So we just have the epilogue left. I don't know how long it is. Doesn't matter. We're going to finish it. So, epilogue. Jace tried to project an outward display of authoritarian calm as he sat in the chair behind his desk, but inside his stomach was churning. This is crazy. You've done a million debriefs. This is no different. But it was different. It was different, simply because of who was involved. Satil and Master Nostaral were already there, seated in two of the four chairs that had been set up on the other side of Jace's desk. The other two seats were empty, reserved for the director and, of course, Theron. 3 days had passed since the victory at Duro. In that time, Jace hadn't spoken to either Satil or Theron, apart from a few words as he presented Theron, Nostaral, and Tefeth with the Cross of Glory, the Republic's highest honor. At a semi-private ceremony attended by several dozen dignitaries and officials. From the other side of the door, he heard his receptionist's cheerful, high-pitched laugh. A few seconds later, the door opened and Marcus stepped in, closing it behind him. "Where's Theron?" Jace asked. "He said he couldn't make it," the director said, clearly uncomfortable. "He's given me his report. We can contact him after the debrief if we have any follow-up questions." Jace was stunned. Blowing off the debriefing wasn't an official act of insubordination. Technically, Theron answered to the director, not Jace. Marcus could have ordered him to come, of course, but that would have been entirely counterproductive. Still, Jace had been hoping to see him. "Okay, then," he said, covering his disappointment with gruff professionalism. "Let's begin." The debrief didn't take nearly as long as Jace would have expected for an assignment of this nature and complexity. He could have blustered about how the entire mission was put in jeopardy because Theron and Nostaral failed to follow orders, but it would have been just for show. Everyone in the room knew the truth, and Jace trusted Satil and Marcus to know best how to handle their people going forward. Instead, they stuck to facts and analysis, and the whole thing was over in less than an hour. As everyone rose to leave, Jace said, "Grandmaster Satil, can you stay a moment?" Nostaral and the director left quickly, closing the door behind them without being asked. "You aren't the only one who was hoping Theron would be here," Satil said once they were alone. "Is it that obvious?" he asked, coming out from behind his desk to try to pace out some of his frustration. "It is to me," Satil said, standing motionless as she watched him go back and forth, "but I can understand why he wouldn't be in the mood for a family reunion." "Do you think he still blames me?" "You did the right thing. You brought the fleet to Duro. Does that make up for letting the Empire attack Rouen?" "We can't always fix our mistakes," she told him. "We can only learn from them." Jace frowned. As usual, he didn't find the typical Jedi wisdom particularly helpful. He stopped pacing and turned to Satil, standing right in front of her. "How do I make this right?" Satil shook her head. "You know him as well as I do." "That's the problem," he said. "I want to get to know him better." "Then wait for him to come to you," she said. "That doesn't seem to be working too well for you," Jace pointed out. "The circumstances of your relationship with our son are different from mine," Satil noted, and Jace sensed a deep regret behind her words. "Don't you ever want to go and talk to him?" "There are a lot of things we want that we cannot have," she answered, her expression unreadable. "It's the burden of leadership." She reached out and placed a tender hand on his shoulder. She left it there for a long moment, then pulled away and turned to go. "Goodbye, Supreme Commander." "Goodbye, Grand Master," he replied. When she was gone, he sat down at his desk and fired up his workstation, determined to lose himself in the endless mountain of reports that always seemed to need his attention. To his surprise, he saw there was a private holo-recording waiting for him. "Sorry I missed a debrief, Commander," Theron said to him when he opened the message. "Something I needed to take care of, but maybe later we can go get that drink we talked about. Give us a chance to just, I don't know, talk, I guess." Jace flicked off the message as it ended with a small, contented smile. Hidden in the shadows in the back corner of Tefet's hotel room, Theron watched the Twi'lek pack, listening with amusement to her grumbling complaints as she rummaged through the room in search of anything worth stealing. Stupid Republic gives us a stupid medal, can't spend metal, not even worth it to melt down. Looking for something, he asked, stepping into view. As if by magic, her blaster suddenly appeared in her hand. How'd you get in? Believe it or not, these high-class hotels don't actually have great security. Tefeth lowered her blaster, but shot him a dirty look. Never paid us, she accused. Got your credits right here, Theron said, pointing to a bag in the corner where he'd been standing. Actual credits, not a Republic chip. 10,000 actual credits. I didn't think a Republic credit chip would have much value where you're going. 10,000, she protested. What about credits Gorvich stole from us? That's between you and him, Theron said with a shrug. Knew we couldn't trust you, Tefeth said with a scowl as she went over and picked up the bag. I might be able to come up with a couple thousand more if you stick around, he offered. Not staying, she said, dumping the credits onto the hotel room bed so she could count them. Hate it here. Too shiny. I know what you mean, Theron thought. Out loud, he asked, So what's your plan? Don't know. Figure it out. Can't go back to old Tyan Brotherhood. Thanks to you. I bet the director could find a position for you with SIS as a field agent. Pass, she said, scooping up the credits and stuffing them back into the bag. Not interested in filing reports for a boss behind a desk. We only work for ourselves. She slung the bag over her shoulder and headed toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back to Theron. No more spying on us, she said, wagging a finger in his direction. Don't need you watching over our shoulder like Big Brother. Theron watched her go, not saying anything until the door had closed behind her. You might not need me watching over your shoulder, but I'll be there anyway, he bowed softly. That's what family does. And that is the end of the epilogue. So the rest is all about the author, Drew Karpyshyn, I guess is how you pronounce that. And then a whole bunch of excerpts from other Star Wars books. So that is that. So let me get out of that. Yeah, 40 minutes. Not too bad. So let's see what we're doing next. It won't take me long. I have it linked here. So that was Annihilation. So our next thing will be Surface Details, which is just a short story. 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of short stories in a row, so I will probably read 2 or 3 of them per reading till we get through them, because there's like, I don't know, like 10 of them in a row. So I'll probably try to get through, and they're all like 5-6 pages, so I'll get through like 3 of them a night. And then we get into what is next after that? The Lost Tribe of the Sith. We're back to what one? I'm not sure which one we're on. I'll have to figure that out. This one's a combined volume of of 7, 8, and 9. So I'll have to figure out which one we're on. I don't even remember anymore. But that's where we'll be going next. So I will see you all in Friday's reading for the next book in Plato the Republic. We're on book 7 of 10 books. So that's where we'll be Friday, 9:30. See you then.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace.